Hey guys, this is Matt Wenning at winningstrength.com, and today we're going to talk about my favorite deadlift movements. Now, the deadlift wasn't the exercise that I was mostly known for. I broke more world records in squatting and bench pressing and totals, but I was a great deadlifter, and the way I got to be a great deadlifter was very complex for me because of my broken legs when I was a kid. So with my right leg being broken 6 places, my left and 4, and a shattered pelvis, my body didn't allow me to overtrain the deadlifts too often. But what I find is that switching over into tactical and other types of endeavors for guys to get stronger, it's actually a smarter way to train because it's less mileage in one spot. So I'm going to show you some of my favorite deadlift variations, and hopefully that'll help bring you some more variety into your training and reduce the mileage. So let's get to it. I train the sumo deadlift constantly, and why? The sumo deadlift helps with hip mobility. So if you're just trying to get stronger to feel better, you're not really trying to be a ultra competitor, which is probably most of you people watching this, the sumo deadlift is awesome for increasing hip mobility. You know what the #1 problem for lower back pain is? Hip mobility. So if you get better at sumo deadlifts, your hips are going to get more mobile, and also the transfer to conventional is vast. You notice that most of the time when people get here, this is where they fail on conventional. It's because they don't know how to use their glutes. The sumo deadlift forces glute activation in a better path, and then when you go back into conventional deadlifting, it helps tremendously. So make sure that you're utilizing sumo deadlifts in your training. The next big thing I think is very important to getting super strong is you need to start pulling from deficits. Now, even though I wasn't really well built to deadlift, I still utilize the deficit deadlift, making it more difficult. Why? Because it increases my mobility, so when I get to a regular bar sitting on the floor, it feels like it's really, really high, therefore putting me in a better position and making me stronger. The reason you don't see a lot of people utilizing deficit deadlifts is because it makes you look weaker. It's probably going to take anywhere from 10 to 30%, depending on what you're doing, off of your deadlift. But that should be an indicator that these are weak muscle groups. So I love pulling from a deficit. You get a lot more back work, you get a lot more hamstring work, and a lot more glute work, and you're making the lift a longer range of motion, therefore muscle work. So the point is that deficit deadlifts need to be in your particular library of exercises and need to be rotated in quite frequently. The next one that I really like is using the double band deadlift. Now, we just got done doing a cycle of this. I worked up to way over 400 pounds with 220 pounds of band tension. The only limiting factor is that you're probably going to need a special deadlift platform to do it. Now, what we did when we were in college, we would tie the bands onto dumbbells and then stack the dumbbells in a big square to where they would be locked down and make their own handles. Having a deadlift platform works really well. I know Jump Stretch sells one. We make a deadlift platform that can do it. But double banded deadlifts have always helped me tremendously. Why? Because the deadlift, once you break it off the ground, you notice that most of the time when some people get the deadlift off the ground, they usually can get it. It's that starting point. The band deadlift teaches you to drive all the way through the lift, and that really helps a ton. The hard part is that if you set it up correctly, it's insanely difficult to do. So I like the double band deadlift. It teaches me to grind really, really hard above and beyond a normal deadlift. And I don't think if I'd have been using these very often, I would have been able to pull 800. But like I said, the double band deadlift is, in my personal opinion, one of the best deadlifts to utilize because the environment is so much different than free weight. It's getting harder and harder and harder as you pull it up. So utilizing it is a great environmental change. You're changing the resistance type, making the body have to adapt to a new stimulus. We're gonna go the opposite direction now, talking about deadlifts, and we're gonna work on limited range of motion deadlifts or pin deadlifts out of the rack. Now this is where you can set the pins at different heights and you can pull from different positions. What I find amusing is that pin deadlifts, if only used sporadically, actually are more difficult than pulling off the floor because the timing is weird. So usually for most people, a little bit below the knee is amazing to working the weakest links of the deadlift and putting on maximal muscle growth. The problem with the pin deadlift is if you use it too often, you'll get stronger than off the floor, and then the transfer of the lift won't be as great. But we use pin deadlifts maybe about 6 or 7 times a year, and it really shocks the system. And then when you go back to the floor, it's like you have another gear on your transmission. They need tempos. The reason that they need tempos is because you're already in a limited range of motion, therefore you need the same amount of work as off the floor. So when I do pin deadlifts, I'll usually do a 3-3 count. This means that I try to count in my head 3 or so seconds up and 3 or so seconds down. Why? We've already limited range of motion. So if range of motion is limited, then we need to make sure that the muscle contraction time is still similar to a regular deadlift. How do you do that? You slow it down. Trust me when I tell you that a pin deadlift set at your particular weak point, pulling from a tempo is insanely hard because you can't just yank it off the pin and get it started. You're actually forcing it to squeeze longer, taking longer to do the movement, which is matching the time under tension it would be off the floor. So pin deadlifts are another one of my favorites. So I hope this helps you guys start to understand you need different deadlifts, you need different types. Most importantly, you need different positions. Other exercises that are really good for building up the deadlift are good mornings, like the good morning machine, reverse hyperextensions, and things like that. I built my deadlift up with lots of variation and lots of accessory exercises versus pulling competition position all the time. Now, if you want to get strong really fast, pulling in the same position that you compete in all the time will get you better, but eventually you're going to hit a wall and overtrain, and then you're not going to make any progress. So you better have a bigger library and take the long road to get your deadlift better, so that way you don't beat up your back and screw yourself up. If you need more information, come on to Patreon and ask some questions, or check out the manuals where we've already built in this variation for you to help you get as good as you can without getting beat up. Talk to you guys soon.